Good morning, Asia. It's very kind of you to have made time this morning to talk with me about the issues of aviation and what it means for the future of tourism in the Caribbean, and indeed, I guess, for the whole of the Caribbean economy, because you are in a relatively remote part of the world and aviation is clearly very important to you. For those of you who don't know Asia Williams, she is a consultant in climate change in the Caribbean, and she works with the Branson Center for Entrepreneurship. Asia, I wanted to ask you first, how do you see the risks for the Caribbean if internationally or just in Europe, the cost of flying is increased through a polluter pays tax system of one sort or another? How serious would that be for the Caribbean?
Yes, good morning, Harold. Well, if tourism declines because of a reduction in flights coming to the Caribbean, that will have significant impacts on our region. Most people know this region is a tourism dependent region. It makes up a significant part of our economy. If you look at, say, islands like Jamaica, where I live, it contributes to 33.7% of GDP. So you're talking about knocking out a third of our economy overnight if there's a decline in flights. And we've already seen this with COVID. In the second half of June, we had as many flights as we used to have in a single day, and that's had huge economic impacts on us. So any reduction in flying because of the cost of price, which would encourage less people to take a holiday to a further destination, there's significant air miles and carbon emissions associated with longer flying, and with more consciousness, I think, which is a good thing about the impacts of flying. We've had people like Greta Thunberg, who has done an amazing job on raising awareness around climate change and the impact of flying, encouraging people to fly less. But at the same time, if less people fly to our region, it means higher levels of unemployment. At the moment, tourism makes up here in Jamaica about 30% of employment and 50% of exports through tourism receipts through US dollars. So it's a huge challenge for the Caribbean. There's many other states across the Caribbean that are dependent on tourism, and it's a mainstay of their economy. I don't know if you've seen recent reports, but especially with the decline in cruise ships, a lot of places really depend on cruise ships, and now at the moment we have no cruise ships. So I think the economic impacts of the reduction in flying on the region would lead us into a recession and into a significant decline unless we learn to diversify. But I still think that tourism is a viable part of our economy, and we need to shift more towards ecotourism, sustainable tourism, so that people understand, even if they take a 9-hour flight or however long to the Caribbean, that they can then get involved as part of their stay in tree planting or mangrove restoration, coral reef restoration projects to offset their impacts. And also, I do think that the airline should be more responsible to shift towards cleaner energy, cleaner fleets, and look at how to, green their industry in a sustainable way, because it is very important. I mean, our region is so vulnerable from climate change. Even though we only contribute 1% of global emissions, we're already experiencing significant sea level rise across the region. A lot of places that are reliant on really beautiful beaches are losing their beaches due to sea level rise. We're also experiencing droughts, and that's making us more dependent on importing food. We're already a very import dependent region. It's very costly for us here because a lot of things are imported. So we're already seeing shifts in our ecosystems due to climate change. And I think it is important to address climate change for sure, but the economic impacts of the reduction in flying will hinder us significantly.
Asia, you're unusual, aren't you, in the sense that you know a great deal about climate change and the impact it will have on the Caribbean, as well as being involved with tourism. And there aren't that many people who straddle, as it were, both worlds. Where do you see the balance for the Caribbean between the critical importance of dealing with climate change, and aviation is a part of the problem, it's not the only problem, but it's a big part of the problem, and looking after the economy and the livelihoods of local people? Where would you strike that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think tourism is still a very important part for the Caribbean. You know, people are very interested, not just in our white sands and the beautiful beaches, but in our culture as well. You know, we have a really interesting history. Carnival is a huge part of our culture. I don't know if you can see my wings in the background, but actually,
Yeah.
Carnival, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and Carnival makes 50 million US dollars per year for Trinidad. And also Jamaican Carnival, it makes 4 million US dollars for Jamaica a year. We were meant to have Carnival in Jamaica in April. COVID hit, it got moved to October. Now it's cancelled for this year. So you see, it is having a direct impact on our economy. And if people fly less and don't come to experience our culture, it will similarly have that impact. But in terms of climate change, I think our region is incredibly vulnerable as a collection of small island developing states. We can't shy away from that, and we really need to focus our tourism sector on adaptation at this point. I think for larger countries that emit much more than us, they need to focus on mitigation. But for us, it's really about how do we adapt to these challenges of increased storms. If you look at a lot of recent reports from the IPCC, they say that the hurricane intensity is going to go up. That makes our region very vulnerable during hurricane season. That will lead to loss and damage of tourism assets and other infrastructure that we rely on, flooding and other negative impacts. So we really need to focus on building that resilience and also incorporating our tourism offering into making people aware of these things, how they can contribute to solutions and really reduce the negative impact that tourism has. So, for example, a lot of people aren't really aware that the sunscreen that you use, some of them have chemicals that are very damaging to the coral reefs. If you look at certain reefs, they are very, very damaged. And I'm a diver myself, so I'm so tired of diving underwater and seeing dead and dying reefs. And then when I come on land, people are talking about climate change as if it's something in the future.
Hmm.
It's really having a negative impact on our ocean. And as small island states, we are actually what I like to call big ocean states. I would love people to refer to us as big ocean sustainable states because we have 80% more sea than land. That is actually our biggest asset. But the ocean is so vulnerable from climate change because it absorbs all the carbon dioxide, it absorbs a lot of the warming. And so there are significant changes happening in our fisheries and on our reefs that will also negatively impact us if we don't learn to manage it much better.
Asia, you've talked and we've talked a lot about the leisure tourism aspect, but I'm assuming that even if you were less dependent on tourism, aviation would still be really important to the other parts of your economy. I mean, there are Caribbean islands who are very heavily involved in financial services and so on, and for them, aviation connections are equally important, aren't they? It's not just about tourism.
Yes, a lot of people fly back and forth to the Caribbean for business. It is a business hub. There are certain islands that have financial or tax incentives as well. It's also a great place to live, work, and do business outside of work. It's a really beautiful environment. So I always encourage people to think of the Caribbean as a business option. But with the decline in business flights actually subsidize a lot of the general flights. So if we're seeing a fall in business flights, then we're going to see the cost of flying go up. And obviously that makes the Caribbean a less expensive a more expensive destination, and I think it's difficult now in the long term to compete with people that are looking for more cheaper options, shorter flying times, more sustainable options, which, shorter flights has less emissions. So we really need to focus on working with the airlines to do carbon capture, maybe through tree planting projects, mangrove restoration, and those sorts of things, like I mentioned, and regrowing our seagrass as well, because they also store a lot of carbon. And I think that tourists, they can be involved in these projects, and they can realize that you can travel a bit further, but come to a really incredible destination and be part of environmental solutions. So that's one of the projects that I also work on.
I guess I should share with you, Asia, I don't think I've said this to you before, but the first time I actually saw climate change happening, and I'm very familiar that climate change is already impacting on people's coasts and food insecurity and all the rest of it. But the first time I actually saw it in the field was in a mangrove in Belize, where the guide pointed out to me where you could see actually in the mangrove the impact of the climate change. And I do think that that's one of the things the tourism industry can do for people, is to show them that it's happening now. Because all the problem is we keep talking about 2050 and what must be done by then, but the reality is the climate change is now. It's already underway. I think tourism does have a role in communicating that.
Yeah, I mean, in Jamaica, there's a fantastic spot called Hellshire. Tourists and locals, they love to go there. It's a really beautiful place, like 40 minutes outside of Kingston, and you get the best, freshest seafood made there. The food is incredible. But years ago, say 2010, when you used to go to Hellshire, they had a beach, so you could swim there as well as have your seafood. Now you can only stay in the restaurants, and the water is right up to the restaurant. So the entire beach is gone. That was in the space of 5 years, from 2010 to 2015. I can send you photos and you can see the comparison between the shoreline is essentially gone, and those businesses now need to look at, do they move back, do they relocate, do they raise their floor levels, and obviously that impacts them as well, because less people will come if they are interested in going to the beach, and there's no longer a beach there.
Asia, can we come back to the issue of aviation? Because you may not know this, but just on the 21st, so yesterday, there was news that Airbus are planning to have flying by 2035 zero emissions hydrogen fueled aircraft. That's the good news.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Potentially, it will be possible to make those fuels, I think, in the Caribbean, because you have plenty of sunshine, and that's what's needed to make by making renewable energy to then make the hydrogen fuels. So potentially you won't be importing as much kerosene and so on as you do. But I think we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't recognize that aviation is going to be more expensive if it's based on hydrogen fuels, at least in the short run. So good news for the environment, but again, an increase in the cost of aviation, which will have impacts on the Caribbean, it seems to me. Do you think the Caribbean could adapt to higher cost aviation? If you took out the moral reasons not to fly, and I've said very often, the problem with aviation is not flying, the problem is the dirty fuel. So if we get rid of the dirty fuel, but it becomes more expensive, is that a better proposition for the Caribbean?
I mean, it would still have a negative impact initially, I think, because especially in this global environment where people are losing jobs or getting pay cuts, the economies are shrinking, you're going to have to convince people to spend more to travel to our region, right? So I think initially it would have a negative impact, but actually it's really for us to work with our international partners to showcase what the tourism sector has to offer to holiday makers. And I think that once people understand that and how beautiful and unique the region is and what kind of experience and the variety of experiences they can have here, I think that it's still an attractive place to travel to. But for the budget conscious traveler, which is becoming more predominant with millennials, I think there will be challenges, and really we want to be able to share our region with as many people as possible. It's really has a lot to offer, not just sun, sand, and sea, as I mentioned, culture and really, really beautiful biodiversity. So I would be nervous about the impact it has on increasing prices, because we're a region that embraces everybody. So yeah, I would really want to see a balance whereby the airlines and governments can take some responsibility on making the cost viable for people still to travel. And I think the fact that it's sustainable is excellent, and that definitely needs to happen. I don't disagree with that. I just worry about the impact that it will have on our region. But if we can also be part of the value added and in the sector innovating, then that's also great for us.
I think that's what we all have to hope will happen, Asia. But who knows? We're still very early days, but I think it is exciting that we may be seeing zero emissions aircraft in the skies by 2035. Because I think you're right, younger people particularly are very resistant now to fly, particularly long haul. I think they misunderstood the impact of their short haul flights, which are also pretty serious. And they seem to be willing to fly short haul, but they're less keen on the long haul. But that will change over time.
Yeah, but also I understand like millennials are in a situation, you know, where they're having less economic opportunities, less disposable income. So these sort of £30 EasyJet flights are very attractive to go to Spain or something like that. But the offering is completely different as opposed to coming to the Caribbean.
Asia, thank you very much indeed. Let's hope that the problem does get solved and that the cost of hydrogen flying is not that much more expensive that it destroys tourism to the Caribbean. I certainly hope so. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.